a few people, but I will repeat this as many times as needed. That is not a problem. So today, what I want to talk to you about is your photo voice assignment. You got the assignment, but Dr. Elizabeth Cohen, who came up with this assignment, wanted to enlarge it because last year it was so successful in that one of our students presented her information along with Dr. Cohen at I want to get the name of the event correct, at a community engagement group conference. And it went so extremely well that she wanted one of you guys to present and go with her to the event this year, coming up 2021 in the spring. And all of you should have a copy. They have a copy, Agnes, of the photo voice?
Yes, I wanted to send it after the class, after you discussed it, because there was 2 people that already had done their photo voice. So if you're able to do this assignment also, that way we can just include everything.
Okay.
Because they had done the previous assignment.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what Dr. Cohen did was she expanded and she enlarged the assignment. So for the upcoming session, she's asking you to take 2 cell phone photographs that respond to the prompt, my trust in the healthcare system, or my genetics, or my experience of a neurological disease or a neurological condition. So it could be your experience with working with someone in your family or someone in your community that may have had Alzheimer's or dementia, their behavior, that such as you see with autism, or mental health related behavior. So any of those behaviors. I'll go back to my trust in the healthcare system, because I think right now, trust in the healthcare system is a huge, huge issue. And when you start to look at it from a community perspective, how the community views the healthcare system varies so very greatly depending on where you live and your interactions with the healthcare arena and how successful those interactions have been or how negative those interactions have been. So when you start asking yourself, my trust in the healthcare system, what will you do? You could take pictures of various clinics, various hospitals, or places that you visited and places that you had experiences in that particular location, positive and or negative. And you can just express through your pictures your feeling about that encounter. Did you go in with a lot of fear and a lot of worry, and you found that the staff inside, they were able to comfort you, they were able to talk to you, they spoke to you in a language, in your language. So if you spoke Spanish, they spoke to you in Spanish. If you spoke Greek, they spoke to you in Greek. Whatever your language happened to be, they were able to talk to you in such a way you felt comforted, you felt better when you were leaving than when you arrived in the healthcare system, or you went for a COVID vaccination and you received the vaccination and there was someone there who was able to tell you what to expect from the vaccination, that you might feel a little soreness. Sometimes people may feel a little tired after the vaccination, but they took the time to talk to you. Or were your experiences negative? And if they were negative, how were they negative? Did you go someplace and people didn't talk to you? You felt neglected? You felt overlooked? Why did you feel overlooked? Things along those lines. So what she's also done is you can write a paragraph about your selection and how it affects your health. And you can email the whole thing, the photo and the photograph, to Dr. Elizabeth Cohen, or you can send them to me. I am still working on getting them in a gallery to host our exhibit, because I think the community and the participants in our Community Research Academy have submitted some fantastic work, beautifully done, and express so well. And when I say express so well, I mean, they were able to just express how they felt about it. And that was moving when you see the picture and you read the work, read the comments. It was very well done. So I want you to take a look at it. Agnes is going to send you two different examples of
Yeah.
what Dr. Elizabeth Cohen is referring to.
So,
The first one is a bill that someone got in Northwell Hospital, and they had insurance, and they discussed what they had to go through to get their insurance accepted. They had insurance, but something happened in the system. So rather than for them to go, their insurance information to glide through the system, it hit some type of snafu, and they wound up getting a bill when they should have gotten a bill. So very interesting, very, very interesting. And if someone wasn't able, some people are able to sit on the phone and call different people and follow through and follow up, especially if they understand the system. But if they don't understand the system, it could take hours, it could take days, it could take months. It could wind, it can go into collections. It can become a real big problem. It can mess up your credit score. It could just linger for a very, very long time. So the person that had this incident, they were able to talk to the right person and activate their insurance. Now, there is another prompt, and it's autism. And what it discusses is, this is my son's lunchbox, which I pack for him every night. He's 27 years old and has high functioning autism and depression, which often occurs together. He tried living on his own, but when the pandemic started, he moved back home. He was lucky enough to get a dream job at the New York Public Library. He commutes from our home in Long Island. So this person goes on to discuss how they're feeling about this whole experience. And it sounds simple, but when you have a child who's 27 years, well, he's not a child. When you have an adult who's moving back home as an adult into your home after leaving, that can create all sorts of feeling and all sorts of drama. So what I want you to do is take a look at it. If you don't understand some of the words, or you can call me back and we'll talk about it. But I think it's so important to just express how you feel and how the situation appears to you, because in a photo voice or photo novella, it's your voice that moves everything. It's your voice that allows other people to understand how you see the world or your worldview and how you feel about it. And your worldview and how you feel about it can impact others in a very powerful way. So what I want you to do is take a look at the photo voice assignment. If you have questions, let us know. Thank you so much.
okay. So, okay.
Okay, now today our speaker is Dr. Katie Hootman. She's a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and director of the Nutrition and Metabolic Research Core here at Weill Cornell Medicine Clinical Translational Science Center. Dr. Hootman directs the operation of the Metabolic Kitchen to provide specially designed diets and nutritional formulas for research. And that sounds simple, but that is not simple. She counsels and educates patients per protocol and provides training in dietary assessment and data collection methods to research teams. She also conducts body composition assessments, implements indirect calorimeter measures. I'm messing those words up. Anthropometry, and uses software for menu designs and nutritional analysis of recorded dietary intake. She offers expertise on human nutrition and diet, research designs and methodology, and collaborates with clinical investigators who engage the resources of the CTSC. Now, the next voice you will hear is Dr. Hootman's.
Thank you so much, Lula May, for the kind introduction. I get hung up on those words too. Definitely. Well, thank you. So I'll move forward. I'll share my screen and let me know. All right, can you all see the nutrition and metabolic research slide?
Yes, looks good.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Hello and good afternoon. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm happy to connect with you today to talk about some of the content that was in the videos that were assigned for this week, some really important topics like social determinants of health, but also I'm excited to discuss the CTSC Nutrition and Metabolic Research Core, who's in our team, what we do. And Agnes will let me know if there are any questions in the chat, and she'll let us know that we're on track for time toward the end. All right, well, let's begin. How about now? There we are. So the objectives for today in this short time we have together is we'll review some of the concepts from the digital content you watched, as I mentioned, including the social determinants of health and minority health disparities. We will really just scratch the surface on these topics because these are entire disciplines of study and of public health. So in our short time together, we'll just discuss some evident examples and talk through some of the video content. We will move on to a deeper dive into the information about nutrition research and the variety of activities that we do at the CTSC Nutrition and Metabolic Research Core. And at the end, we'll wrap up with a few questions for discussion. And I'm happy to hear any questions from you or any topics that you are interested in. So one of the animated videos was from Let's Learn Public Health. And this was about the social determinants of health, the definition, and these determinants of health were defined as the conditions into which people are born, conditions in which they grow and live and age. These factors have a large influence on our health. They also are factors that help us understand health inequities, which are the unfair and avoidable health differences between different groups of people. This video explored the social determinants of health and offered a very useful framework, I think, for understanding them and also understanding what kind of factors we need to pay attention to when we're trying to understand complex health issues that face communities as well as individuals. I think the voiceover for the video did a great job at explaining how these characteristics and life circumstances interconnect to impact personal health and public health. So the animators depicted the World Health Organization's framework for conceptualizing social determinants of health. Broadly, there were two categories, the structural determinants and intermediary determinants, and they're interrelated and both contribute to health. There are also some factors that overlap across these categories. So the structural determinants we can think of as things that an individual might not have a lot of control over. These could be municipal or community or city level policies, government policies, nationwide policies. They can also be factors like gender or ethnicity, again, something that we don't really have control over to change as we age and as we live and grow. Things like education, occupation, and income, those are also structural determinants that may change given over one's life or depending on their choices. Intermediary determinants include things like biological factors and really behaviors. Behaviors are, we can think of them as this big umbrella group of the choices that people make in day-to-day, these lifestyle factors. Also, other intermediary determinants are things like material circumstances, as well as psychological factors. And these factors all interact and interrelate to also interact with the health system, how an individual or how a community group interacts with seeking health care in the health system, as well as the political context and socioeconomic context of health care and these determinants. So looking at this diagram, each of these variables is very complex, and there's a lot of information that's baked into each of these one-word factors. But as you look at this diagram and think about, where would you categorize what someone eats and drinks on a day-to-day basis? What kind of factor do you think that is? Anyone can chime in with what they think. Any takers, or is everybody muted?
You can also write in the chat your answers and I can see the answers out loud.
Great. So these would be the choices that, oh great, there's live transcript available. You can just chime in, interrupt me, Agnes, if anything comes in the chat. So if we're thinking about what people choose to eat and drink on a day-to-day basis, that can actually mean quite a few things. It could be something related to their tradition or heritage, or maybe it's a convenience-related choice of food. But broadly, we think about what people choose to eat and drink, or their dietary behaviors rather, in that behaviors category, in the intermediary determinants box by and large. But we could also think about exceptions to that, like for example, policies that affect what food is available or how much it costs or how accessible it is. That might be a structural determinant that affects the behavior in terms of dietary choices of individuals and groups. I would have loved to see this video go further into detail discussing diet and nutrition, because the structural determinants and intermediary determinants, it can be a really deep discussion, and we can identify unique factors that we can understand better so that we can improve health, as I've said numerous times, of individuals, but as well as of communities and populations. So one of the social determinants of health is food insecurity. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic has dramatically affected dietary choices for millions of Americans. Food security is a determinant that is related to socioeconomic factors and physical well-being. And food security refers to how reliably a person, a family, a household, or a community is able to access adequate amounts of nutritious food. In this recent report from Brookings Institute, we see that rates of food insecurity among households approximately doubled with the onset of the pandemic. And it's also noteworthy that the proportion of children with very low food security has more than doubled since 2018. Now, this graph only goes to October of 2020, or November 9th, rather, of 2020. And so keep in mind, this data doesn't reflect 2021 or the winter of 2020, 2021. We'll get into that. Oops, there we go. For reference, in this study, food insecure rather was defined as households that responded as often true or sometimes true to the following statements. The first statement was, the food we bought just didn't last and we didn't have enough money to get more. And the second statement was, the children in my household were not eating enough food because we just couldn't afford enough food. And so I think those are very rare, very real world statements. They're statements that everybody can understand and probably identify with to some extent. And so to see this jump in food insecurity, especially a graded response of food insecurity, so very low food insecurity, is also characterized as hunger. Related to the pandemic is worth understanding and a little alarming. So we have some more recent data, and this shows food insecurity. The figure looks a little bit different, but similar data from this same survey, the same household survey, administered in April 2020, in December 2020, and then again in March of 2021. And if you look at, here I can use my pointer, if you look at all respondents in April of 2020, it was between 20 and 25% of respondent households reported some level of food insecurity, where the dark orange part is hunger or very low food security. And then the light orange part is low food security. And we see that here we are in March of 2021. So this is the most recent data that we have, is the level of the percent of respondents that reported some food insecurity is a little bit lower than it was in April of 2020, but the values in March of 2021 are still higher than they were before the pandemic at all. And so this helps to see trends over time, but also these data show the burden of food insecurity on single mother households as a particularly is a particularly high burden, where single mother households reported, or over 45% of single mother households reported food insecurity in December of 2020. And that number has come down, that proportion has come down to about 35%. But these data are important to see who are some of the most vulnerable population subgroups in our community, or in even our national community in this case. And so food insecurity is something that's of interest to me, of course, to see over time, but it's a lens through which we can understand the experience of individuals as well as families and communities. And I think that's important. So let's move forward. One of the other videos that I really liked is Michelle's story. Michelle Simmons is a patient, a mother, a grandmother, and she is active in her community of West Baltimore. So she had family members with diabetes and heart disease, including her mother, who died of heart disease. And her video I found really inspiring, because in her story, she talked about how she likes to make healthy meals with her family. And that really started when her daughter went to college and came home with a different diet. That's how she said it. And one of the reasons I just have the utmost respect and inspiration from the story is that Michelle had an open mind, that when her daughter went into this other experience and then came home, instead of pushing back against change, Michelle was able and willing to try dietary changes, to try choosing something a little bit healthier, changing from fattier cuts of meat, she mentioned, to having more salads and vegetables. And it allowed her to build healthier habits that also strengthened her family relationships, because her family became closer and she could see how she became healthier, how she could help her community and her family as well. And I found that was really compelling, not only to have an open mind, but also to be able to see one's own habits as, this is what I usually eat and this is how it's affecting my health, and to be able to have an open mind to say, maybe I should change this and see if it has an effect on my health. And then when healthy changes kind of take root, to be able to teach others about those healthy habits. She commented that she had been accustomed to eating fattier foods or different foods and in different ways that maybe weren't supporting the best health for her. And especially as she saw members of her family get sick and some of them even die. Her story also shows how cultural practices around food can be held up to the light, and how individuals can choose for themselves whether the practices that they're accustomed to doing are really in their best interest. An individual can choose for themselves whether they want to keep doing what they've always been doing, or try something else to get a healthier outcome. And that's really empowering, is that people can choose for themselves. But sometimes it takes having, a family member or someone that is trusted to come with good information. I think that's something that's important for all of us, because we all look out for our own health, and we all look at our own habits and practices. And I think it's important that we all ask ourselves, are we doing things that help us get closer to our goals or to help us be healthier? And if not, what could we do differently? So one of the other things I really liked about Michelle's story is that she also joined the academic advisory board of the academic medical center in her city. And this is a direct way that she can contribute her point of view to guide their activities and activities at the medical center and in research specifically to benefit individuals like her or in her community or with a similar point of view. I mean, to get your point of view in an influential space is something also really empowering. She's a go-getter and a great example for making healthier changes. So another of the videos discussed the different phases of clinical research. So Barbara Hootman discussed the research phases with you a few weeks ago. So I will not go into this in depth, but as a reminder, the T phases speak to the path of translational clinical research. And this video discussed the different phases of development that it takes to bring drugs or devices and diagnostics from an experimental idea to a useful and marketable intervention technique. So each successive phase provides a stronger level of evidence that the new drug or the new device or the new diagnostic approach works as intended and is reasonably safe. From Bench to Bedside has been a part of the National Institutes of Health programmatic emphasis to streamline translation of discoveries made in labs to effective innovative therapies for patients and populations for many years now. This paradigm of translational science has actually forged now a couple of generations of scientists and researchers with that aim and have the lens of translational science. So From Bench to Bedside and Back Again has also helped create interdisciplinary research enterprises like the CTSC to identify and support the best, most promising projects and professionals in science across health disciplines and in different settings and across different applications. So in my role as director of the Nutrition and Metabolic Research Core, our research is usually testing different dietary formulas or foods, sometimes nutrients and sometimes other dietary interventions on nutrition-related outcomes and behaviors, rather than newly developed drugs. So this aspect makes our research generally safer than drug trials because we are working with food and diet, sometimes counseling techniques, and it's also more accessible to researchers across discipline because nutrition underlies all health and disease. Though given the translational science context, before we proceed with studies where we're testing the effect of full-scale experimental diets in patients, the components of the dietary intervention are tested in bench laboratories before they ever make it to prime time in humans. So this can include testing nutrients in cells or in vitro, as it's called, in labs, as well as in animal models. And we see that those nutritional tests in those different systems, whether in animals or in cells, if they yield favorable results, that's when we can move forward, getting closer to human studies and human research. So the initial in vitro and animal studies are very important steps that can show the proof of concept of the hypothesized effect of what we might change in the diet and how we think it's going to affect the disease or the clinical characteristics and more so. Also, a benefit of working in dietary research is that we can often find real world data of nutrient intakes and eating patterns that are already evident in humans. And so we're not often coming up with these nutritional strategies out of nowhere. Oftentimes there's human evidence out there of people who eat these foods or populations or groups who eat these foods. And we can use that evidence to support new ideas of how we could better understand nutrition and how nutrition can be this active agent in health, or how nutrition can be an active agent in the recovery of illness for individuals and populations. Clinical and Translational Science Center is committed to advancing medicine and health in individuals, families, and communities. Each of the gears in this graphic reflect a team dedicated to working collaboratively together to create, test, develop, and implement innovations to improve health outcomes. There are a lot of moving parts to discovery. The CTSC seeks and supports creative and promising research across a wide variety of disciplines, or an array of disciplines. And some of those disciplines include cancer and oncology medicine, metabolic disease such as diabetes, as well as cardiovascular disease and others. Also, innovation is in other fields too, such as engineering, software development, genomic science, infectious disease and vaccine development, the opioid crisis, and more. These are also areas where the CTSC is involved. So the Nutrition and Metabolic Research Core is a team and a set of resources within the Clinical and Translational Resource Unit. So let's move on to a bit more about our team and what we do. So our core collaborates with physicians and scientists to provide services for research that are related to diet, nutrition, and indicators of metabolism, such as body composition and metabolic rate. So metabolic rate, you can think of as how many calories a person is burning, right? Whether they need that energy to be resting, or they need extra energy to be doing exercise or moving around. And you can think of body composition as what is the body composed of? Sometimes this can be as straightforward as how much is fat mass versus fat-free mass, right? That would be like a body fat percentage. Sometimes the body composition question is a little bit more detailed, where we want to determine how much of the body is water, how much of the body is skeletal muscle, how much is bone, etc. We also train medical students and fellows, as well as dietetic interns, in the methods and practice of nutrition and metabolic research. And that's a key part of our mission as well, is the education piece. So when we think about it, like, what is research? Because it's helpful to have some concrete examples when we're talking about these broad categories. So seeing some of these examples will kind of demonstrate actually how broad the field of nutrition research really is. So research, to start off with, is a systematic study to determine new facts and create new knowledge. This was one of the things that really drew me to research early in my career, is that research is, the purpose of it is to create new knowledge, to identify new facts, to study things so that we figure things out that advance our understanding. And so what is nutrition then? Well, nutrition can be the study of food and diet. This can be food composition. So what are certain foods made up of? This can also be patterns of dietary intake and eating behaviors. So again, a dietary pattern is the foods that you would typically eat. It's a pattern over time. It's not what a person eats at any one meal or in any one day. It's really a dietary pattern, which, if you think about the types of foods that you choose, day after day, month after month, there's a change usually in the pattern of the foods people choose that varies by season. Sometimes it varies by the life stage that a person is in as well. And so looking at different dietary patterns is actually a growing area of research that is of increasing importance. There's public health nutrition and epidemiology. This gives us population guidelines, such as the dietary guidelines for Americans that are related to nutrition. There's also looking at sustainability. That fits under the food and diet subset of nutrition research. So looking at agricultural practices. There's also the study of specific nutrients. So these can be micronutrients, things like vitamins and minerals. Also macronutrients. Macronutrients are considered protein, carbohydrate, and fat. So those aren't the same as vitamins and minerals. But what we can look at is how are those nutrients consumed? Where do they come from? But also how are they absorbed? How are they metabolized? How does the food we eat give us nutrients that we then turn into our body? And what promotes health and what might work against health sometimes. So also looking at the interactions between nutrients and the body. And these can be nutrients and enzymes, or the way that the nutrients are broken down. These could even be genetic factors about a person or a population that affects how food or nutrients can be metabolized or utilized. Another aspect of nutrition is nourishment and nutritional status. So malnutrition and hunger and food insecurity, as we've touched on already, are significant problems globally, as well as in the United States, as well as in New York, right, in our city. Everywhere malnutrition and hunger are of concerns, especially when they occur in vulnerable populations, such as children, but also in older adults, in really and across socioeconomic status, in lower socioeconomic groups, we are really concerned about malnutrition, hunger, food security. And there are actually a lot more areas of nutrition research that we could get into, but in the interest of time, this is a broad overview. And so seeing these examples of like how broad the field is, there's a lot of potential in the field of nutrition research for study and to improve practice. So every study starts with a compelling, unanswered question. That's what we're trying to solve every time a study happens, is what facts do we need to determine in order to advance our understanding of a topic or of a health-related question. And so the research question drives the study design, it drives what data is collected, how it's collected, as well as the analysis of those data, what conclusions can be made. And broadly, there are two groups or two types of research. So there are observational studies and intervention studies. And it's important for you to keep in mind when you hear headlines about research, because often great studies are designed and carried out to answer the one narrow research question. And sometimes a headline will say something about the study that really the study wasn't designed to answer. And so be skeptical if a headline about nutrition seems a little too sensational. It probably is. It's probably a little bit either exaggerated or misinterpreted from what the research actually says. So the research question, as I mentioned, is, it tells us like what we're going to measure and how we're going to measure it. And once we have the research question, that tells us whether we can answer it from an observational study, which is a study that doesn't implement any changes in the group, but an observational study is, what do we observe in people who are already living and reporting kind of what their habits are. Sometimes the research question is more oriented to if we can make a change or implement like a certain dietary change or give a certain drug, for example, if we intervene in some way, do we see a change in health, right? So the observational studies are appropriately named because these studies make observations and measurements in groups of individuals without requiring the subjects to make changes. And in the context of nutrition research, these studies collect data on how people and populations live their lives, including their dietary intake. These studies are also called cohort studies because there's a cohort of people that's usually followed forward in time and asked about their lifestyle habits maybe once a year for many years or every 6 months for many years or a few years. And so there's usually a cohort of people in observational studies that's followed forward in time. If there's a cohort of people who are only measured at one point in time or asked about their lifestyle habits at one point in time, that's called a cross-sectional study, and that can also be observational. All right. So intervention studies, as I mentioned, is when there's a change that's administered or required for the study. It's in the study subjects are intervened upon. That can be seen as another way. So moving on to some of the nutrition services that we can provide. So we conduct mostly intervention studies. So that's really our expertise. However, if there were observational studies where we might be analyzing the dietary intake records that have been collected from a group, we could also do that. But in clinical research, there's usually an intervention that's administered. And so our role is to provide services for approved clinical research that engages the CTSC at Weill Cornell. Some of the services we offer are the nutrition research design consultation. So again, this is when a researcher who has a really burning question, but isn't quite sure how to study it or how nutrition might be a factor in their research, they'll consult with me and our team, and we'll identify what the best study design is to answer that question. Whether it's an observational study or an intervention study, what are going to be the steps of, say, the intervention study? Who needs to be included? What is going to be the intervention? All the details such as that. We also do anthropometry and body composition assessment. So we take those measurements of, say, height and weight, for example, and do the body composition assessment. Behind me is the bod pod. That's one of the instruments we use for assessing body composition. I'll show you more about that in a few slides. We also do indirect calorimetry. So this is the measurement of resting energy expenditure. And also, so it tells us kind of how many calories a person is burning at rest, but also what kind of fuel is being burned to supply those calories, whether it's mostly carbohydrate or mostly fat. So we also do staff training for multi-center trials. So when research studies are conducted across multiple institutions, we make sure that all the personnel on site are on the same page and have the same procedures and the same understanding, so that there's continuity across all the sites for studies that we're involved with. Some of the tools that we have here is we have absolutely expert staff. Our team in the metabolic kitchen, just as one part of our team, has decades and decades of experience in nutrition research, and our team as a whole has more than 100 years of experience in nutrition research. I myself have been working in nutrition research well over a decade. We also do anthropometric measurements, as I already alluded to, in the bod pod. We also have a bioelectric impedance device, which is another device we use for body composition assessment. So what do these devices look like? Well, here we have the indirect calorimetry to assess that resting energy expenditure, how many calories somebody is burning just at rest. This is kind of what that data looks like here. So what we do is a subject will be at rest and wear a mask, and what the device does is it actually measures the type of air that the person breathes out, and based on the composition of that air, it tells us kind of what is going on energy-wise inside the body. And then this bod pod that I pointed out behind me, a subject will sit inside the bod pod, and based on the amount of air that the body pushes out just by sitting in there, and a very accurate weight, we can also determine how much of the body is fat mass and fat-free mass. And the person's only inside the pod for about 50 seconds at a time. They're not in there for very long at all. So we have a few more services. So there are professional services we offer, which is a nutritional assessment, nutrition counseling, education, educating patients in groups or individual sessions we do. We also do ongoing nutritional monitoring or protocol. And again, I can't talk to the expertise of our staff enough. They're fantastic. And our nutrient analysis software is another tool that we have. As I mentioned, we might analyze dietary intake records. They could be food diaries or 24-hour recalls, which is a list of all the foods and beverages that a study subject consumes within a 24-hour period. We might get records like that, and we routinely analyze those from many studies with different research questions. Often need some dietary intake record where they can make conclusions about, what are the subjects eating, especially if the research isn't implementing a change in the diet. It's really just observing what the dietary choices are. We analyze quite a few food records for studies that ask questions like that. All right. One of the best and most important tools that we have is our metabolic kitchen. So our metabolic research kitchen is a resource that we have where we can actually prepare and serve research diets that include weighed diets where the portion or the type of food is very specifically weighed. The patient or study subject might consume a certain amount, and then we might weigh what's left over so that we can get a very accurate account of the nutrition that was consumed by that subject. But we also have nutrient controlled diets as well as time restricted diets. Sometimes time is the intervention point for the study, and also balanced diets. So those are where we're looking at micronutrient intakes being ingested and then excreted. So our metabolic research kitchen has been a resource here at our institution for decades. There's been some type of research kitchen here for several decades. All right, now that you've learned a bit more about what our core does and the kind of types of work that we're involved in, but also some public health concepts like the social determinants of health, there are a few points of discussion that I would love to hear from the group. And the first one is, can you think of a nutrition-related issue that affects your health, the health of your family, or perhaps the health of your community? And again, anybody can chime in. You can unmute and chime in or put it in the chat. But I'd love to hear from you.
Hi, Dr. Hicks. Yeah, we hear you. You can go ahead and answer the question.
Oh, do we have Deborah?
1981, 1980. Today, although decided that you can have really vegetables or modify keeping your diet, don't have to work or have any plan.
I have a hard time hearing you.
Oh, boy. Okay. Is it better?
Thanks, Agnes, because I couldn't understand.
Yeah.
I would love to hear what you have to say.
I wasn't sure if it was my computer or.
Probably my computer. I'm having trouble. I'm going to work on my laptop and on the PC. I was saying that 1980. She was told not to eat green leafy vegetables. Is that under your jurisdiction? And if it is, now the rule is you can have green leafy vegetables, but just look at don't change your dietary intake, no more, no less. Who made that decision? Who decided that? Who did the research on that? Is that under nutrition and metabolic?
I have to say, I
didn't
was
catch that.
listening so hard, and
Ask her to type it in.
Would you be able to type it in, Dr. Hicks, and I could read it?
that would be a great solution.
I'll come back. My credit.
The quality of our food.
How so? Tell me more. Tell me more.
In certain areas, certain neighborhoods, you don't get a good quality of food. And we have, yes, we can go to the farmers markets, but they're not near.
Mhm.
So the quality of fruits and vegetables that are in the local stores is not of the best.
Yeah, that's a great area of research. because it's so important, right? Especially if the stores that are close to home, don't have the foods that, like you said, fresh fruits and vegetables, then it can be pretty hard to include those in the diet, even when somebody wants to. And you're right about the farmers markets. They're fantastic if you have access to them, but I know the farmers market in my neighborhood is only during my work hours, and it's like 2 miles from home. So that's a really good point. Are there some foods that you wish you had more access to?
Well, I'm fortunate enough, I drive to the farmers markets. The local supermarket has the food, but I don't believe the quality is the best. They have everything in the local supermarkets, but I don't believe it's the best that we should have.
Good point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And for me, labeling is always the key problem for me. Labeling is not universal. It's not consistent. It don't match with my Fitbit. It don't match with my Apple Watch. It don't match with all my data collectors. Labeling is the best strategy to keep the public totally confused, because it's a whole foreign language by itself. So you really can't get this nutrition thing together because the language is not universal and it's not friendly, and it's all by design, and somebody's getting paid very well to keep us confused.
Oh, wow. Is there like a specific thing on the labels
No, I'm
that
just
you're
saying,
looking for?
what I mean when I say on the labels, everybody's using, some people using metrics, some people using standards, it's just the biggest game in the world to keep you confused. It really is. And anything specifically, no, I like to try to track everything that I am. There's not too many people that walk around with a Fitbit every day, an Apple Watch, and my ring is collecting data. And all of these people can't even talk together, but I'm gonna keep on trying to do what I gotta do for my health, but it's bad and it's good because it's by design.
Right, but I'm sure it takes you a lot of time to try to harmonize all those.
But listen, every morning I'm on the scale. Every morning I'm taking my blood pressure every morning. Like I tell people, some people watch basketball or whatever. I'm on into chasing this data and trying to monitor the best that I can, but it's not fun. Some things you can barcode and scan for Fitbit. Some things you can, it's just, but it's a sad world, but somebody's getting paid very well to keep us confused.
That's a really good point, that sometimes sometimes something is convenient where you could scan it and get that data into your trackers, right? Wow, I had no idea you had such a variety of trackers. That's fantastic.
No,
but you're right. It takes a lot of time to try to understand what tracker is telling me what, and if the nutrition information is different across all those platforms, like say,
it would really be nice if you can go shopping and barcode all of these things. I have another particular app that's pretty accurate. You can even take a picture of the food and it'll tell you what it is. If you take a picture of the bagel, it'll say bagel, but it's just a really complicated task. And once again, they don't speak in a language that the people can understand.
Right.
I just want to interject quickly, just because next week we have Natasha Ashley, who would be discussing a food app. So it'll be another app you could possibly add to your list.
Oh, I got a whole lot, man.
Yeah, great.
And we got one called the VA Move app. And what I like about that is I tell people all the time, it's not trying to sell you anything. It's not trying to convince you anything. It's just the facts. But then their capability of collecting the data is not as user friendly.
True. That is true. The data collection piece is key.
Dr. Hootman, I have the question from Dr. Hicks, the one we were unable to hear before. She apologizes for her PC is not working too well, but she said in 1981, mom had thrombophlebitis. She couldn't eat green leafy vegetables. Today, the recommendation is that one can eat green leafy vegetables, but no more or no less. And then how does her question, who is responsible for that research, and how could findings change over several decades?
Absolutely. So that is a fantastic question. And so for that condition, the treatment is usually a blood thinner. And the way that those blood thinners work, a really common blood thinner, you might have heard of it, Coumadin, or warfarin is another name for it, but the classes of blood thinners, the most commonly used one, how it works is by altering blood clotting, by working through vitamin K. And vitamin K is really rich in dark green leafy vegetables. And so the old recommendation used to be, if you're on a blood thinner, don't increase your vitamin K intake. So they told people to not eat the dark green leafy vegetables. But the dark green leafy vegetables are actually really healthy, and they have health benefits that don't necessarily affect the clotting risk as those foods interact with the drug. The key recommendation and why it's changed is that the dark green leafy vegetable intake should be consistent. So what they'll do is they'll dose the medication, they'll dose the blood thinner so that it matches the typical level of that person eats dark green leafy vegetables. And because we know that dark green leafy vegetables have all these health benefits, we don't want people to stop eating them, but we just want to eat that. We want people to eat them in a stable amount day after day if they're on blood thinners. That said, it takes kind of a large increase in the consumption of dark green leafy vegetables to, I guess it depends on the condition of the person, but really the take-home message is that the guidelines changed, the advice changed, the recommendations from your doctor changed because it was really the consistency of the dietary intake day after day became more important than cutting those healthy things out. A similar thing happened with kidney stones, actually. They used to tell people that had the most common type of kidney stones to not drink any milk, and they told them to avoid things with calcium. And what they found is that because calcium was in the common type of kidney stones, and also to avoid dark green leafy vegetables, because there's a compound in dark green leafy vegetables that interacts with calcium to make this common type of kidney stone. But in the research since then, since about the 1980s is when that recommendation came out to decrease intake of dark green leafies and calcium containing foods like milk. What they found is that by cutting those foods out, it actually led to perhaps more osteoporosis, but it also didn't necessarily decrease kidney stones. So they told people to stop eating these nutritious foods, but it didn't necessarily decrease the risk for kidney stones in the long run. So similarly, over time, as we learn more, and that's why as we learn more and conduct research, we learn really what's the healthiest advice that we can give people. And it's oftentimes not to cut out whole food groups, but it's really to adapt other interventions or lifestyle habits around a healthy diet that's balanced. Yeah, that's a really great point of how can the advice change over the years, and it does as we learn more, for sure.
Right. I wanted to answer the question that you have here. That one of the answers would be, education is one of the issues that contribute in many cases because people don't know what to eat. They don't understand food and how it behaves in your body. And
That's a
so
great point.
the more we get educated and through research, it's a good point, the better we understand what to eat and what not to eat and what worked for us. So we need to be vigilant on, paying attention to what, how you feel when you eat something so that you might connect it to how you're feeling. The other thing is, as some other people have mentioned, the condition of the food that some community receive and they have available, I think are inferior to other communities that have where the food is fresher, it's in better condition, it's not mistreated, it's refrigerated all the time rather than, being refrigerated and then on the shelf and then back in the refrigerator because people may not care about it. Could change the composition of the food and the nutrients. Those are the things that I have.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, so the time between when a food is picked or harvested off the plant that it actually gets to a consumer, that time and all of the points in between where that food is bumped around or dropped, but also exposed to Light, like even UV light can degrade nutrients in there. And so the more time there is between harvesting of the food and when it actually gets to the consumer, you're right, that can change the nutrition profile of some things, especially if the food gets damaged or if it spoils along the way, something like that. The good thing is though, is there are some forms of food, if fresh food isn't available or doesn't look great, doesn't look like it's in great condition, frozen food, like frozen fruits and vegetables are a fantastic alternative, because frozen fruits and vegetables, they are picked at the peak of ripeness from the plant and then processed immediately, usually really close in time and proximity to where they've been picked or harvested, because that makes the freshest frozen product after it's been thawed. And so and also canned vegetables and fruits as well are an alternative, that again, the food is picked at peak ripeness and then processed immediately. So I cook with frozen fruits and vegetables quite often, because a lot of times, right, by the time it gets to the store that I go to, you know, it doesn't always look great. Sometimes it's been bumped around or bruised and or wrinkly, like it's dried out, you know, the fruit has already dried out. And so I would, shop in the frozen food aisle. That can be a really good option. Good points all around. I agree. Well, I have another question then. So both of the other discussion questions I find really interesting, and I would love to hear from you, is, you know, what's a social determinant that you think needs more research?
BMI,
What's that?
the BMI,
The BMI, like body mass index?
right. How long they been talking about that? Has that changed? Has that evolved? Who knows who was a part of that research? All I know is what I see BMI. I don't never see like BMI updated.
Yeah, that's a really good point. They have not changed the BMI cut points in a very long time, and I don't think that they will. They have come out with different BMI cut points for like different ethnic groups, just because, as we know, there are tons of body shapes out there, and there are lots of different healthy body shapes. And so the BMI is the body mass index. It's meant for a very, very broad population. And so if there's on an individual level, you know, being close to normal weight is you know, likely the healthiest across different types of bodies and shapes and sizes. But the BMI doesn't really tell us about body shape or like where body fat is stored. But that's a great point. I mean, it's such a commonly used metric of BMI. But we also know that, you know, say somebody who's really, really muscular and doesn't have a lot of fat, they're going to have a high BMI because the body mass index is based on that, on body mass. It's based on weight to height. Whereas somebody else who might be the same weight, but doesn't have much muscle mass, but has a lot of fat mass, you know, those two people might have the same body mass index value, but we would imagine they have very different health risks, right? For the person who's particularly lean, meaning they don't have a lot of fat mass, they might, you know, realistically have a lot lower health risk than somebody who's got a lot of fat mass and doesn't have much muscle mass. So that's a great point of really how body mass index could be studied or at least maybe clarified or applied a bit better. Interesting.
Well, I think the food pyramid changes quite often, right? The food pyramid, don't they change different things on that? Or each year they come out with some, I can't remember the name of the thing, but they come out with something.
Yeah.
But I ain't never seen that. Right, but I never seen that with the BMI. It just stays the same.
That's right. That's a good point. Yeah, the food pyramid transitioned to a plate diagram a few years back, and I think the plate method actually makes a lot more sense of when if you're looking at your plate as a meal, you know, if you can make half of it whole fruits and vegetables, you know, pretty close to like unrefined plants, and then have a fraction of it being whole grains if you can, but grain, you know, a portion of grains, and then, you know, a moderate portion of lean protein. And then they have dairy on the side. So I think the transition from the pyramid to the plate was maybe easier for people to apply in their daily life, but yeah, they come out with dietary guidelines every few
That's what-
years. And
you're right,
so,
that's what I'm-
yeah,
So
yeah, the dietary guidelines for Americans.
that's
Exactly.
what-
I have
Go
a
ahead.
question. I have a question. This is Jose Mesquita. What database do you recommend? Would you think is have more accurate information for nutritional products? Like, to know what's in fruits and vegetables.
Sure.
If
So
you wanted to
that's-
check, yeah.
Yeah, so that is a great question. And that's actually a question that we talk about a lot in the development of different apps, right? So how do we get the best information? And I have to say the information that is readily available and comprehensive is the USDA's database. It used to be called, I don't remember off the top of my head. It's now called Food Data Central. They changed it in 2020 to, there's a new kind of user interface where you can search one food at a time. We used to be able to use the MyPlate tracker on there, if you're familiar. There used to be different ways of tracking it. I'll just leave it at that. But that's a great database. It's the US Department of Agriculture's food composition database. They have barcoded foods. It's called the branded food database, where those would be commercial foods. Anything with a barcode should be in that database. For the most part, so our tax dollars pay for this database. The great thing about it, about not necessarily the branded database, but the food composition database, like where you could look up apples or pulled pork, something like that, right? You can look up all these foods and see the nutritional breakdown, but you get more nutrients than there would be on a nutrition facts panel, right? Like on a food with a label, you'll see a nutrition facts panel that has, the same set of nutrients for every nutrition facts panel you see. Well, in the USDA database, you can see kind of what specific fatty acids or amino acids, the types of fiber that are in the different foods. So it's a much more detailed database. But the really great thing about that database is that because our tax dollars pay for it, they update it and maintain the database. So as new foods come out, they add to the database, and the methods that they use for determining the composition of foods is really transparent. And so not only is it got transparent methods, but it's also freely available. And so even though they changed the interface where, in my opinion, it's a little less easy to use because you can't make meals and analyze whole days together. It's very easy to search for one food at a time and search multiple databases within the USDA umbrella. So I would recommend that.
Yeah,
Kind of a long answer, but
I'm familiar with the USDA database. I know they changed, made it more complicated, I think.
yeah. What databases are you interested in or have you thought about?
I worked in the food department in my company for many years, and I've seen a few like Asia.
Yep. So
Yeah,
we use the ASHA
Asia Cook.
database for when we analyze food records,
For
actually.
analyzing, yeah, for doing recipes and all that. Yeah, I used it a lot here for diet books and all that I analyzed a few years back.
Excellent. Yep. Very
I don't do it
familiar with that
I don't do it
My-
anymore
My
because
Fitness Pal is also good.
Say that again?
My Fitness Pal, it's an app. It's also good.
Yeah, MyFitnessPal, it was one of the first really good apps, I think, that got people tracking their nutritional intake, what foods do they have, how much, when did they eat. There's one drawback, at least when it comes to research studies, is that for MyFitnessPal and actually a few other databases, since users can upload their own data, there's no fact checking about it.
right.
And so when users upload their own, they might have a mistake in there. And it can be available to everybody who uses the app, unless MyFitnessPal has changed that. But I know I used MyFitnessPal for a very long time because it was just so easy. And even now it's a really easy way, especially for people who are just starting to track their diet. Because it's very easy to search things, but also even for people who are seasoned, who've been tracking their diet for a long time, because once you start using that app, you have all this history in it. You know, and like the frequent foods that you select, MyFitnessPal pulls them right to the top if you need it. So that's a great point. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
I know. I like Extra. Extra has you can create a profile and do all these calculations with it and estimates so that you know how many calories you can eat and all that. But it's may not be as easy for some people to use. And also you got to pay for it.
Exactly. I need
Yeah.
a license.
You need a license, yeah.
Well, these were fantastic points. I realize we're already at 3:30. We have just about a minute or two more.
Yeah, I just want to say one more comment that Ms. X said it a while back, just to answer one of the questions was transitory housing movement from shelter to shelter, and then she'll also determine economic status and attitude towards healthy eating when available. More economically middle have different eating habits than poor. Many poor folks eat what is on hand, have substandard veggies, and cannot afford organic food. So let's make everything organic, and it won't be a classist.
Yeah, the different access to certain things.
Yes.
I will make a point though, that organic food isn't necessarily healthier. In fact, like conventional farming methods for a lot of foods have evolved because they allow for higher yield from crops and also for those crops to grow longer. And sometimes those crops have more conventionally grown foods may have more nutrients than organically grown foods. So, and that data is out there. Like those are published studies that show like the amount of, say, vitamin C in a conventionally grown tomato versus like an organic tomato. So there's evidence on both sides though as well. Like organic produce, it doesn't have the same exposure to pesticides, obviously, that conventionally grown agriculture, but it's not a slam dunk. We'll say that organic food is like healthier. It's not like across the board. It really depends on kind of what your goals are. Like if you're trying to avoid certain pesticides or certain chemical residues on food, be sure to wash your food very well. But also that might be a reason to choose organic. There's a list that's published every year called the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. And that is a list of the Dirty Dozen are the top 12 foods that carry the highest pesticide load. That, having a diet that's entirely certified organic is not necessarily healthier. But if there are certain foods that you're interested in, what might be useful to get an organic variety of, that would be looking at the Dirty Dozen. The Dirty Dozen, if you want to avoid the exposure to pesticides. But again, if you want to avoid that, you can just wash your food really well too. And looking at the list of the Clean 15, those would be foods that conventionally grown don't carry such a high pesticide exposure. But yeah, thinking about the choices between what food is available and, not only what a person or a family or a community can afford, but also what's available, what's there, is it in good shape? Does it look like it's in good condition? And I think sometimes we might get wrapped up in the labels like certified organic, where, you could get something that's fresh and, grown in a place that you're familiar with and that what the environment is like. And that might be more nutritious than getting something that's certified organic that's traveled 1,200 miles to get to your store and sat on the shelf for a while. So there are lots of factors, but that's a really great point. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I don't know if there is time, but I just want to make a comment. When a food is labeled certified organic and one that's labeled organic is kind of the same by law, by USDA law. If it says organic, it should be organic. It should follow the rules. And
So
the certification is something that is a label that's kind of bought, I guess, people have to pay for it to have it.
People do have to pay for it. Yeah. So
Right, yeah.
there's an emblem for the USDA certified organic. That is a defined set of steps that the grower needs to pass and be certified on in order to put that on there. As far as like the regulation of what terms can be used on labels. You're right that there are definitely rules around what can be on a label. However, oftentimes companies will break the rule until they're reported, until enough for people report them, and then they have to change the label. There's some like health claims on labels that need to be approved first before it can go onto the label. But you're right, there could be some claims on labels, like especially around like humane treatment that, you know, have very little meaning. And even the organic, like certified organic is a protected term, but I would have to look into whether a product can say it's organic. It might depend on the product, because organic can kind of technically mean it's you know, made of
I think the
organic materials,
the
so.
regulations now, they do say it and they don't follow the rules, then they are violating the rules and they could be fined. So everything that says organic should be organic.
Yeah, I
And
would look for the little seal though too, if you're
It's
really, yeah,
it's more reassuring, I guess. Yeah, the other thing is that when you have something organic, it doesn't have pesticide, doesn't have a lot of things that can harm you, but it also is more exposed to the other stuff, you know, that the pesticides are not protecting it against. Like, you know, it's exposed to bugs and everything else that is out there.
yeah.
So yeah,
And organic, certified, I'll just interject with one last thing. Certified organic things can have pesticides on them. They just need to be organic pesticides.
Thank
Which-
you.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
hate to interject, and we're
No
having a
problem.
lively conversation. I'm enjoying it, and I think everyone is enjoying the information that's coming forth. But it's time for us to let Dr. Katie Hootman go. Thank you so much, Katie. We appreciate it. I appreciate all of you and your great questions that you had. So I
Yes,
thank you so much.
thank you.
And Dr. Katie, you have last words? Anything, last words you want to say?
Thank you so much for having me and for your questions. I wish we would have had more time for conversation, because I feel like this is a great group. You guys
It
got some
is.
great interests. You're
Very
in it.
excellent group. So
All
thank
right.
you so much.
Thanks for inviting me. Great to see you.
Thank you, Doctor.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank you, panel.
Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow, Friday.
Tomorrow we have a
Tomorrow,
class.
yeah, tomorrow we have another date for tomorrow.
Yes.
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 All
Mhm.
right. Take care, everyone.
All right, take
Okay.
care.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day,
Bye-bye.
all.
Bye-bye.
Have a blessed
Have a
one.
blessed one.
Thank you.
You're welcome.